You made it to the Go Commando Show with Fred Galvin. On our new mission, we contend with the naked truths of health, leadership, and overcoming adversity. Now it's time to Go Commando.
Hey Commandos, we've got a great guest tonight, and that is Marty Nevshemal. He has spent over 30 years as a professional, and it all first began right out of college when he became a Marine Corps intelligence officer. We're going to talk about that in his service and how he served both active duty and reserve and went on to earn his Master's of Business Administration. And then he began in the corporate world with Sprint at their worldwide headquarters in Kansas City, and then moved on to his first love, which was soccer. He is the Chief Financial Officer and Vice President of Finance for Sporting Kansas City, which is our local Major League Soccer franchise. So he's always been a big team player, and I want you to be a team player as well. And a lot of people have written me and say, hey, I want to be a team player. I really do, but I'm not sure if I can totally go commando. I got you. The solution to this is easing into it through going to the GoCommandoShow.com website, where you check out the shop and you can get your clutches on one of these long sleeve t-shirts that says Go Commando and it's got our logo on the back, or you can get the short sleeve polo. We even have them for the ladies, so everybody can gradually go commando. Second, I want to talk to you about a great product that you can access through the Go Commando Show's website, through the Amazon banner and links, and that is a product from Amazon called Alexa. Many of you know this, and we have the full size, which has much better sound quality, which you can use for your living room, in your kitchen, wherever, or if you got something smaller space at the office. This full-size version, $79 approximately today through Amazon, and the Echo Dot, which is 1/4 the size, not quite the sound quality. And what these do is they can tell you everything just like Google does. Alexa, what is the temperature? Or with smart switches,
it's 50 degrees with cloudy skies tonight.
So with smart switches, they can wire your entire house, and they can open and close garage doors, front doors, lock doors. They can turn on alarms. They can do everything just like you would hit a switch, but they can do it through your own voice. So it's a great product. $79 for the full-size version, $29, that's our current price. But you go to the Go Commando Show website, you hit the banner for Amazon and type in Echo. Thanks for watching, and now we have Marty Nevshemal. Hello, Commandos. We have another exciting show for everyone today, and this is a little bit different. We have a Major League Soccer franchise, Sporting Kansas City, right here in the Heartland, and their Chief Financial Officer is our guest today, Marty Nevshemal. And I won't hold it against him because he graduated from the University of Iowa. He's going to explain his story, how he grew up, a little bit about his education. He served as a Marine officer, and after he was commissioned and did his duty, I will let him explain how he ended up here at Sporting Kansas City. It's a very interesting journey that he took. And welcome to the show, Marty.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing in Iowa and what life was like as a youth before you went to college and joined the Marines.
Yeah, sure. So a little background on me. I was originally born in Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
Littleton, Colorado, just a small suburb outside of it. And when I was 10 years old, I moved to Iowa. My dad, who was a nuclear engineer, believe it or not, moved to Iowa, where they had a company called Stanley Consultants, which is a consulting firm on nuclear power. And it was a kind of a shock to me going as 10 years old, going from a big sort of city, Denver, to small Muscatine, Iowa, which is only 30,000 people, in a small town. But I think it was great. I lived right on the Mississippi River, probably about half mile away, and there was a railroad track before it. And I remember with all my brothers and sisters, which is one of the fondest memories I have as a kid, and I have 3 brothers and a sister, just kind of goof around in the woods and doing all the things kids do outside. And it was really an exciting time for me.
Yes. That is a big shift from life as we see it today in most major American cities, most metropolises. There is that criminal element, and you don't see kids out on the street anymore where, unfortunately, and it's very unfortunate, but years ago when we were growing up, we were allowed to run through the woods, and as long as we were home by night and dinner and things were fine.
And that story is absolutely right. I mean, my mom used to just basically kick us out of the house at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and we went willingly.
Yes.
And we ran around the woods, and she would ring a bell at noon. We would all come running back for lunch, and then we would be out until 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night. So, it's a little different world. But it's a very fond memory of mine being with my brothers and sisters, just basically goofing off in all of Muscatine, Iowa.
So you were an athlete growing up, and could you explain what that was like, and your thoughts on which sports you gravitated towards and why you enjoyed them?
Sure. So I was always involved in athletics. It's just I think my whole family has kind of been a very athletic family. And when I was very young, I played youth baseball. I also played youth soccer. So soccer in Denver was actually pretty big.
Yes.
And I started playing that at a very young age through just basically rec teams, local rec teams. When I moved to Iowa, specifically got into high school, I was the first class, when I was a freshman, I was the first class that actually got soccer as a varsity sport for Muscatine High School. And I had played it as a young kid, so I tried out for the team. And, as a freshman, it wasn't necessarily a high bar considering it was a new sport. But as a freshman, I ended up being on the varsity team. And I played varsity for 4 years. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. It was a great sport. We had a very good team. I mean, we didn't necessarily know what you know today with youth soccer and how professionalized youth soccer is and high school soccer is. But it was a very good team. We actually ended up winning our conference a couple times. And I was a pretty good athlete. I'm not trying to break my arm, patting myself on the back, but I was first team all conference, and I enjoyed it. I was a midfielder, primarily an attacking forward, and it was just part of what I did. And it's kind of a DNA that I've had for a long time playing soccer. And that was really the only sport I played in high school.
And you went on to play it in college, too.
And then I went to the University of Iowa, which is just up the road from Muscatine, Iowa. It's about an hour west. And I ended up playing for their club system. The University of Iowa didn't at the time, and I don't believe they do still today, have it as a varsity sport. And so I tried out for their club team. And for the first 2 years at the University of Iowa, I played on kind of their club team and had a chance to travel once or twice with it. And then kind of my life drifted more towards the Marine Corps at that point.
What led you to, did you have some family members who had previously served, or what thoughts put the Marine Corps specifically in your mind?
Yeah, I'll give you the story on kind of how I got to the Marine Corps. And I had always been very interested in the military. My mom remembers me going to taking me to the library in Muscatine, Iowa, and I always she'd always find me inside the military history section, just reading history. And
Guilty.
Guilty as charged. But it was something that has just always been a passion of mine, and I've always read about it, and I've always kind of been attracted to it. From a family member perspective, my dad did not serve. I mean, he was Vietnam age type, but he kind of got a clause out. He was, again, a nuclear engineer, so he was doing that. Then if you look at my grandfather on that side, he was a tool and die maker in Milwaukee, and he actually got an exemption from service because of his skill set working in factories in World War II. But then you go back one more generation on my dad's side. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was in World War I. He was a professional guy. He actually ended up being the regimental sergeant major for the 121st Artillery Regiment that was formed out in Milwaukee, and he served in, all the big battles of World War I as a regimental sergeant major. So that's kind of my lineage on military, but again, I was always attracted to it. And so when kind of my sophomore year rolled around, I happened to live close to the recruiting offices
yes.
At the University of Iowa, and one day, I think I was getting the mail or so, which is in the post office. I ended up kind of looking upstairs where the recruiters were. And I said, let me go talk to him and just kind of go up and see what's up there, go say hi. And the first door I got to was the Marine Corps door, Marine Corps recruiter. And there was a officer that was sitting there by the name of Sam Stroutman, Captain Sam Stroutman. He was the OSO there, Officer Selection Officer. And me and him started talking, and I eventually didn't get to any of the other ones. I didn't talk to any of them, and eventually we kind of worked through it. And to this day, I'm linked in with him on like LinkedIn and Facebook. He's a good guy. I think he got to Lieutenant Colonel, but he was the guy that kind of got me in the Marine Corps, and we struck up a relationship. And a couple of years later, I was commissioned.
Right. It's what I find people in the Marines that enjoy it the most generally are those that have that initiative, that they didn't get hit with a canvas recruiter that twisted their arm and decided, and some people do, but like in your case, you had a very competitive spirit. You were there at the university. And can you also fill us in on some of the details about what led you to studying the field that you did in finance in business at a university? So,
I kind of have three passions, frankly, in my life, it seems, outside of obviously my family, my kids. The first passion was military. Right. We kind of talked about that. My second passion was soccer. Yes. I've done that, and I continue to do that. I continue to play even as an adult, even outside of my role with Sporting Kansas City. And my third passion is kind of finance and business. And this is, again, where my mom, I go back to the stories my mom would maybe tell about me, was that she remembers me at a very young age, 13, 14 years old, pouring through the business section of the local paper, looking at stocks and looking at, what that does. And she just think remembers me doing that on a consistent basis. And so that when I got to the University of Iowa, and I was looking at degrees, that was a degree that I gravitated towards. And so I started right out of the gate doing a lot of finance degrees, a lot of finance classes and accounting classes, and then I selected finance as my undergrad major coming out of the University of Iowa. Yes,
and a lot of folks that either are in school or in business, they look at a position like yourself and they don't really understand how. Now it's a little bit easier with LinkedIn, but they don't understand how somebody got all the way there. He was a Marine officer, but it wasn't a quick journey to become the CFO or vice president of finance for a major league soccer franchise. But so when you graduated, you were commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps, and then you went off that track, which led you at the basic school. You were selected to become an intelligence officer. Could you explain what made you want to get into intelligence versus in the Marine Corps? There's opportunities to do finance, but what sparked that interest in intel?
So that was, another one of those seminal moments sort of in my life, in my career, where, you're familiar with how the selection works way back when.
Yes.
Where, you go through OCS, and then you go to the basic school, and then you have a kind of a moment there where you kind of gravitate towards a degree, or basically an MOS. And I was really looking between two MOSs, frankly, and neither of them were finance. And one was military intelligence, and that was my background. And I had studied some Russian in college. I had studied some German in college and also high school, and I was really intrigued on that aspect of it. And the other side was the infantry side, and I figured, heck, if I'm going to go into the military, why not try something like that? And athletic-wise, I was very, very competitive and in good shape, and so the infantry side really was an attraction to me. Eventually, when I stood in front of the board, I put my little name next to military intelligence, and at the time they only had a couple slots for it. There's only 2 slots for our class for military intelligence. And,
very competitive.
It was very competitive, and I got one of the 2. So
a class of about 200 or 250, or
I don't think it was that big, but it was about probably 200. I think you're talking about.
Right.
But that's
2 slots.
2 slots for intel, and and then there was the infantry had a bunch, and obviously there was pilots in there, and artillery and the works. But I selected.
And in the Marine Corps, I will say, especially as a officer, you're going through that basic officer course, there is a very strong bias towards the infantry and the ground combat, because most of the instructors seem to be from the combat arms. So, they do present all the occupational fields, but it's a lot of the instructors that are in charge of your platoons while you're a basic officer, they are from either the infantry or those combat arms. So it is very, very competitive what Marty is describing. And when there's only 2 slots like that, and they measure you on 3 aspects as an officer: your leadership, your academic standing there, and also your physical fitness and other athletic skills that you do with the obstacle courses and endurance courses and such. So it comes down to fractions of a percentage. And if you're the 3rd guy that applies, there's not enough slots. So it is very competitive. And then after that, so you completed the basic officer course and you were selected to become an intelligence officer. And afterwards, where was that training as an intel officer that you went to Arizona? Is that where?
No, I didn't go to Arizona. I went to Damneck, up in Virginia Beach, where the Navy Marine Corps Intelligence Training Center.
Yes.
The MITSI, and did my kind of basic training there from an intel perspective.
Not a bad place to be.
Not a bad place. It was the winter, although, unfortunately, but still a good place nonetheless. And then my first roll out of that, I went to 2nd Marine Division at the kind of the division headquarters in their kind of division staff as a 2nd lieutenant. Was there a couple kind of 6 months or so until a slot opened up at a battalion, and that's when I became the intel guy for 2nd Battalion and 4th Marines at the time before it redesignated as 2-6. But was with 2-4 as the intel guy for that battalion. And I basically stayed there for my entire time when I was active duty. So it was about just over 2 years, 2.5 years. I'm sorry, 3 years.
Yes.
Active, in 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines.
Yes. And for those listeners who have an inclination, they may want to serve in the military, Marty, talk to the listeners a little bit about the feeling you had, not just knowing that you're getting this intel occupational field in the Marine Corps, you're an officer, but describe how your mind and your heart felt when you knew, okay, now I'm going to go to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and I'm going to be in a Marine infantry division, and later you made it to a battalion, and they have a mission that they're going to deploy worldwide as required. How did that make you feel as a young leader of Marines?
I mean, it was, again, one of those experiences where, as a 23-year-old at the time, I was extremely proud. I mean, it was a event where you go to the battalion, and at the time they were also starting to reorganize the battalions, that you had the scout snipers actually report basically to the intel guy. And so, going right in there, you realize that this is not necessarily real. I don't want to use that term, but it's like this is important. You are now on the battalion staff. You have the battalion as a mission. You're partnered with your other departments within the battalion, as well as your battalion commander, to get things done. And
yes,
maybe sometimes when you're in that, you don't realize how important it is. And today I reflect back very, very positively on the experience. Maybe not knowing how significant it was at the time, but knowing nonetheless that even at the time, that it was truly important what I was doing.
Yes. And a lot of folks without the military background may not understand, intelligence and what that role is, but describe for us, you're making decisions when you're looking at potential threats, and sometimes when you deploy, there's a known threat of what that enemy and their composition looks like and how they could impact, the Marine forces. And you are not only advising the battalion commander, but often you could be giving advice directly to companies or platoons. So that had to have been something that you knew, was very important and provided immediate feedback as far as whether you're doing a good job. And sometimes, the enemy has a say, so the intel's not bomb-proof because the enemy makes a choice.
Correct.
But how was that when you were, some of those decisions when you were a new intelligence officer in a battalion and when you deployed? Can you describe those experiences?
Yeah, I would say when I first got there, this would have been kind of mid '93, late '93 is when I got to 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines, and when you're in barracks and you got folks in the military all know this. I mean, as an intel guy, it's kind of hard to. When you're in barracks, you do training exercises. I mean, you're the guy that put together kind of the Op 4 and maybe the scenario or something like that. But you weren't really touching national or theater level or even division level intelligence assets.
Yes.
And so you're kind of
making a script.
Yeah, you're making scripts and you're going through the motions, but you're really not as real time, and it doesn't feel as real. And then the first time it kind of all of a sudden felt real, and you're like, okay, this has a lot. There's a lot here. And there were really kind of two moments. The first moment was when we deployed as a battalion down to Guantanamo Bay, and this is in '94 into '95, or excuse me, '93 into '93 into '94. The first time we deployed to Guantanamo Bay
in Cuba.
Cuba was with the Haitian and Cuban migrant crisis at the time, and our battalion was one of the first battalions in there that basically started building what today is the camps, which is
migrant camps.
The migrant camps that are the camps that we have for kind of the real bad apples that I think they find throughout the world.
Camp X-ray.
Yeah,
what it became.
We were the first battalion that started setting that up.
Right.
In fact, I was part of the intel sort of core between the base intelligence there at Leeward Side, if I remember that correctly, and how all that worked. But we had our battalion there. We also had a police battalion, MP battalion from the Air Force there. We had the base intel there, and we started setting up the camps and starting to filter through the 50 to 60,000 people that eventually ended up going into those camps from a crisis standpoint. And that's when you really was like, whoa, this is really real, because we started getting help from like the immigration services and the Georgia prisons around, because they had a lot of experience with the Marriott boat lists in the 80s about kind of some of the folks that would come out of these things. We started getting that kind of stuff. And then you're realizing that as an intel guy, you're really part of a very broad network of intelligence organizations that can help you out and give you information, which is, frankly, one of the challenges too. There's too much information at some point. We had to filter through it, but that was one of the big events where it's like, there's lots difference here relative to just being in barracks. And then the other one was when we had deployed it from an LS6F perspective. We were 26 MU, and we went out and did the med floats and everything. And this is kind of when Bosnia was going down. And
for some of the listeners that aren't familiar, Marty's described me. He actually embarked upon Navy ships, and they left the East Coast. Those Navy ships are out of Virginia, and Marines get on those ships. That's our background as a maritime history, and we sail. In Marty's case, it was over to the Mediterranean Sea, and then any type of contingency that would go on that we need a military presence for, U.S. national interests in a littoral area is generally the first line of defense, depending on that threat, for those forces afloat. And that was where at this time, your battalion was redesignated the 2nd Battalion of the 6th Marine Regiment, and you were on ships and you got off. And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this was, we were 26 MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, and this is in '95. And we ended up looking at a bunch of different real-world things. That's what you do, as you alluded to when you go on these things. You're the nation's, some of the nation's quick reaction force and first force that ends up across, off the shores of something. And so there was what was going on in Bosnia with the civil war that they had, and NATO was considering coming in, and they eventually did come in. And we were part of a quick reaction force that was designated as reserves for that. But then we also looked at other things, and that would include, at the time, some of the tragedy that occurred in Rwanda. And we had looked, from a battalion perspective and from a planning perspective, how you kind of get to Rwanda from the Mediterranean. It's a long way. And
very tricky to plan that out.
Very tricky. There's a lot of logistics, a lot of helicopters, a lot of fuel, and it was one of those challenges. But from a real world perspective, we were looking at that. But the balance of my LF6F was really doing some training with, as we went ashore in various places. We landed in Tunisia, we went into Israel, we also did Greece, and then obviously we looked at. We kind of stayed off the coast, but we were really involved with what was going on in Bosnia once the Dayton Accords were signed and the Army came out of Europe to kind of separate the forces, and we were kind of the quick reaction force sitting off the shore. But the neat thing about all that from an intel perspective is once they turned all that stuff on, you started getting a tremendous amount of information and data about kind of what the order of battle was on the ground,
Right.
where all the forces were, and where potentially we could go in or not go in, and what was around there if it did happen.
It is very difficult, and that's what Marines are out there in the Atlantic and Pacific and in the Mediterranean and Persian Gulf on a daily basis doing to this day. We don't just have Marines deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, they're on ships doing our primary, legacy mission that we've been doing for 242 years.
Yep.
So, and then, so after your 4-year active assignment was coming to an end, what were the thoughts in your head, Marty, as far as what next?
Sure. That was another one of maybe 3 big decisions I've made in my life, where for many reasons it was personal, it was also professional, and some things that I wanted to do, and recognizing at the end, it's just Marty's opinion or Marty's viewpoint, is like, at some point sort of everybody's got to get out of the military.
Yes.
And that first 4 years is kind of one decision point where if you generally want to stay in, you got to kind of make the commitment to try to go for a long period of time, and that would be kind of 20 years. People talk about that maybe perhaps as a number. So it's kind of that you either kind of move forward at 4 years to something else, or you kind of stay in and then go for 20 and then move out after that. And I made the decision. There was a lot of opportunity for me in the military. I mean, to be honest with you, I had, as an intel guy, and the field was growing, and there was a lot of things that was going on at the time that I could have kind of stuck around. But I made the personal decision at that point to maybe pursue more of a professional career outside the military. And so I did get out at 4 years, but the great thing about the Marines and maybe the military these days is there's a reserve component to it that I was able to just drop right into the reserves, initially as an active ready reserve, but then as an active drilling reserve, with kind of a passion of mine about, I got hooked up with, I went back to Des Moines, Iowa, which is where my family had moved since I got out of the military or got into the military, and had a chance to be a platoon commander as a captain with Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines, which was based right there in Des Moines. Yes. So it was a great... Remember, I go back way back when I talked about how one of the selections I had was either an infantry guy or an intel guy. Well, the fabulous thing is that when I got out of the military active duty component of it, I ended up getting an opportunity to be a platoon commander for an infantry company, and that was and I did that for several years until I came to Kansas. I came to Kansas City, where I was recruited to Sprint in one of their executive development programs after I got my MBA at the University of Iowa.
Okay. And so you returned to Iowa where you grew up, and you applied for and attended and graduated your MBA program. And your thoughts when you're in the MBA program, you wanted to move into corporate finance. Was it?
Yeah, this is one where I ended up, when I got out, I did start I didn't really, my first decision wasn't necessarily to do an MBA program. But what I found when I got out, and this is the 97, 98 time frame, my degree had kind of aged 4 years.
Yes.
I ended up doing something different than my degree for 4 years. I mean, I was in a finance degree, but doing intel and being in the military. And so I found it perhaps a little difficult to kind of land the job that I thought I was capable of doing based on the fact my degree had aged so much. And so that's when I made the decision to go back to the University of Iowa and to pursue an MBA, primarily just to kind of refresh my degree and to get me to the next level from a kind of civilian perspective.
Right. You took your first position at Sprint. What were some of those roles and responsibilities as a brand new MBA being hired on at? You were working at the Sprint Worldwide headquarters, correct?
Correct. Getting into Sprint was a great opportunity for me, and I think it really was a foundational for where I am from a career perspective. When I was being recruited by Sprint, or going through the recruitment process as my MBA was concluding, I wanted to kind of stay local. So, yes. But I also had interest in technology, because what was going on in 2000, think of 99, 2000
Telecom.
timeframe, telecom, internet, I mean, all that stuff was just exploding. And so I really wanted to stay close or get closer to technology. And Sprint was a wireless company that was growing, or was a wireless landline company that was growing rapidly, and they were recruiting aggressively at the campuses. And I ended up getting recruited into, and this is my, if I could give one piece of advice of where people should try and land outside of either a undergrad degree or graduate degree, I got into a leadership development program within Sprint. It was kind of an executive leadership development program called the Financial Management Development Program. And what that is a 3-year rotational program where, from a finance perspective, you come in and do the 3 different disciplines of finance in 1 year sort of stints. So the first year I did really more like decision support, business case analysis as my first 1 year commitment into a role. And then the program then moved me the second year into a process finance position, which is an accounting role where you close books, you look at balance sheets, and you do that. And then my third role, I was moved in more of a corporate finance function, and that was working in investor relations as one of the primary folks that talks with Wall Street. And that was one that I ended up getting great engagement from, or great exposure to Wall Street.
Yes.
Because you end up talking to people that are moving billions of dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars, and you talk to them about where your company is going and what they're trying to do, and the economics of your business, and the different businesses and key drivers that drive your business. You have a lot of those conversations externally. But the other huge advantage of investor relations is I had an opportunity to really engage at the highest level within Sprint, because you're one of 3 guys talking to Wall Street. So when Wall Street says, hey, I would like to talk to the president of the wireless division, okay, that's one of your owners. That's how Wall Street works. That's one of your owners asking for an opportunity to talk to your president. Now, maybe that doesn't happen, but you got to go talk to the president and get some insight about what he's thinking and what message he wants out. So I had a lot of opportunity to get exposure across the executive ranks at Sprint, and I think that with my leadership capabilities and maybe my analytical approach to things, which I think a lot were driven by the Marine Corps and the benefits of the Marine Corps, and just military leadership in general, military foundational stuff in general.
Did you think when you were a Marine officer, especially active duty and reserve, I mean, you're, as an intelligence officer, you're talking to either the colonel or sometimes his boss, and,
Correct.
and that communication, do you think that helped set you up for success early on at Sprint?
That's a very good point. I think that is one that, especially as a finance individual or as an analytical individual, where you're dealing with very complex subjects, which in military intelligence would be one of them, finance is another, corporate finance is perhaps another. You tend to have to boil down complex things and talk to people who job is not necessarily that, and make them understand that. Finance is a discipline, and it's actually a very complex discipline. Everybody sort of has an opinion how to do finance because they all do their own checkbook, but there's different ways you do finance appropriately. That's why you have MBAs. That's why you have degrees in finance. But you're right. One of the biggest things is being able to communicate those complex things to people that don't do that. And one example I would give you is that a marketing person doesn't go to college for finance.
Yes.
I don't go to college as a finance guy to do marketing. So when I partner with a marketing individual or a marketing BU business unit head, I have to explain to somebody that doesn't have a finance background what is going on with his financials. And that is something that you just can't walk in there and slap down a complex balance sheet or complex income statement. You got to kind of just boil it down to the couple nuggets that he really needs to do, and then say, hey, I got the rest of it. You need to know about this top line revenue, or you need to know about this cost. I'll do the rest of it, but that's the partnership that we have. So the flip side is I'm not trying to go into his world and ask him, tell him how to do marketing.
Yes.
So you're right. I think the communications is a critical part of that, and that's what I did for probably almost 5 years in investor relations, is talk at the executive level, both internally and outside the company. I think it helped me greatly.
It's very interesting having lived in Kansas City, and pretty much if you lived here and have a large family. Some of your family likely probably worked for Sprint at one point in time. But as your background, both as a military intelligence officer doing the analysis and in finance, and studying myself and getting my MBA, a lot of things that Sprint does. I mean, they were acquiring other businesses in the technology and communication fields. And when you're doing that, your role in finance is much in some similar areas, like back to what you're doing in military intelligence analysis, because, there's deception, I'll call it, with like a company 10K or 10Q. I mean, everybody's always trying to make their business look like it's the greatest thing in the world. You can make good points with specific data on certain things while not highlighting or bringing to attention. It's in there, but you need somebody very wise and experienced, such as yourself, that can look through the entire balance sheet and make those recommendations. Like you said, simplify the communication to one of the senior executives on whether this makes sense or not for the organization. Is that what you found yourself doing sometimes?
Yeah, that's one of the key attributes of a good, I'm calling it good or perhaps most successful finance person from my perspective, is somebody that is curious about what the results are. Right. And when I talk to finance people or I give presentations about finance, one of the things I'm looking for and recommending is finance people that look at a number and they don't just say like, oh, the number's like 1,000. They ask the second and the third and the fourth derivative question of that. If it's like, well, why is it $1,000? Why is this invoice that I received from this vendor $1,000? Maybe the first question is like, first of all, is this the right invoice? Should I even be paying this invoice?
Yes.
Which is the deception side, where you have believe it or not, a lot of companies, a lot of fraudsters actually submit fake invoices to companies and hope they get paid. So that's the first question. Like, don't just pay it. Ask the question of what this is and why.
Connect the dots.
And then go down the path and say, what exactly is this invoice for? And maybe this invoice is for something that maybe you, through your reading or through your own experience, know that, I might be able to do this better, faster, cheaper, for the same quality through another organization. And so then you start asking questions like, maybe this bill, instead of being $1,000, could be like $500 if you do it differently. Yes. And now, then that gets to the third kind of derivative part of this thing is like, okay, you've asked the why and you sort of know what it is, and now you have maybe a recommendation as a finance professional who has experience in this field to perhaps do it differently. Well, you're not the guy executing it sometimes, so now you have to go partner,
see if it's effective
with a business unit head, a non-finance guy, and convince them that you, as a finance guy, have a good idea in their business, and you have to kind of think a little more politically and think a little more engagement and a little more strategically about how to engage that, because good finance people or finance people in general are the first, or I call them cursed as well as blessed. They're cursed because they see all the results. So you can if you see results that are sort of not what you want, you can kind of get down and negative and you can kind of get into a doldrum there. But the flip side is it's a huge opportunity because you're the first one seeing all the results.
Yes.
You see the results as they flow in, and you see trends and you see analysis that maybe the business guy is not looking at. And so you have a huge opportunity as a finance individual, finance professional, to influence those results if you take action on them. You're not just an accounting, just somebody who's coming in and just accounting for the results, where you're just parachuting in every month and saying, hey, congratulations, you made your results, or you didn't make your results, and then you go away and you don't see that finance guy for a month.
Right.
I ask my finance professional, and I strive for myself to do this too, is to stay engaged with that business unit on a day-to-day basis throughout the month. So we have a good partnership. It's more of a CFO type relationship. I'm a partner with them from a business perspective. I'm a force multiplier with them,
right?
Where I can have good ideas that kind of help them achieve the results. Yes. And that's really what I think is critical on finance. And a lot of that starts with just a curiosity, but then an analytical ability to then see it to its kind of conclusion.
Yes. Myself, in my experiences, I don't like to call the antebellum, but before the war, which started in 9/11, I would say, my typical experience, serving initially in the Marine Infantry, things were kind of stovepiped. And what you're describing, the modern businesses, that large businesses have cross-functional teams. And that has become the way the military has moved more towards is, having intel, you're closer at the hip. You have inside each company, there's intel representatives. It didn't used to be that way. But can you talk a little bit about how Sporting Kansas City shares their information and how, what it is daily or weekly?
Yeah, sure. So kind of the way we organize sporting is, it's a symbiotic relationship between the technical team, which is the soccer team, and kind of the business side of it. Every sports franchise has a business side of it. I mean, you're selling tickets, you're endeavoring for sponsorships. In our case, we're doing youth soccer and youth soccer camps, and we're doing marketing and we're doing sales. I mean, there's a business side of a sports franchise that we at Sporting recognize and are looking at as being the most professional soccer franchise in the United States, and that's sort of our mission statement. That's our lofty North Star goal that we have is everything is around that and being the best you can be in your departments, while at the same time, from a culture perspective and from an operating perspective, we make sure that everybody understands that you in marketing actually influence sales, and then you in sales actually influence marketing, and you in corporate sponsorships influence the overall economics of the business, and you got to get the right sponsors, and there's a huge symbiotic relationship across the business units and all the different departments that all the leaders of those departments and down to the frankly we call them associates are also aware of. You don't just operate in your own space where you can just do your thing all day long and not know that at some point you need to talk to a finance person, or at some point you'll need some of the marketing department, or something you'll need from the broadcast department. It all works together, and we do that on a very professional basis from a business unit from a business perspective. And then we are obviously influenced by the performance on the field with the players. And the business side has a great relationship with the technical side. But at the same time, too, we also recognize that there's if the team doesn't do well, it hurts our business. Now, the flip side is the team does do very well. It also impacts our business positively. So we run the business with an eye towards producing as much cash flow from the business as possible, frankly, to feed what we're calling, and I think it's real, really an arms. If anybody's been involved with sports, there's an arms race for players.
Yes,
and the ammo that's used in that arms race is dollars, because there is a relationship between how much you spend on somebody and how they perform on the field, then relative to the other side and how much they spend for their person. And so we're in an arms race there from an industry standpoint. Soccer's growing like wildfire in the United States, and it's an absolutely outstanding industry to be in. That's really one of the things that's most exciting about here is that. But at the end of the day, you're really just endeavoring to be a very professional organization from a sports standpoint. Even though it's fun, it's exciting to do, but also from a technical side, the same thing. Very professional and putting a good product in the field.
Can you describe one of the ways? Kansas City is a little bit smaller market than compared to maybe New York or Los Angeles. But how do you innovate to be able to, attract more people as fans, whether it's merchandise or, fans in the stadium or watching on TV? Because, bottom line, we want a lot of fans to, come in, and that's what's funding the whole organization, to include down to the players. How does a smaller market like Kansas City compete against these much larger cities?
Yeah, you probably have less wiggle room for sort of mistakes, if you want to call it that, and we understand that. But at the same time, we don't. If you look across our executive organization, executive ranks, they're not everybody that's just from like soccer,
right?
I mean, our retail head of retail, he's from Target stores. Sure. So he brings a perspective of the retail business outside of sports, and so he brings a perspective. We have Our sponsorship guy used to work for Fox Sports. Our president of our organization used to be in a basketball organization. He used to be in sales within the National Baseball or NBA. Our COO, I mean, he's from CERN, or a corporate environment, as a chief marketing officer. I'm not from this industry, but I have a lot of background in finance at large corporations and stuff. So answer to your question is like we at Sporting look to bring in, at whatever level is necessary, the best person in that job.
Yes.
I mean, every one of those people out there sitting outside this office, they're all A players, and they know they're A players, and we treat them all as A players, knowing that they can influence the business, and no, there's no level that only good ideas come from. And so we have an open door policy, and I think it's a little cliche-ish, but it is true that every idea, where it comes from, we're going to investigate it and try and find a good idea. So it drives back to what you spoke about, which is at the end, how do you get fans?
Right.
And fans are people that are passionate about your product and passionate about what you do, but it starts with a good team and a good strategy and, and good execution. And then eventually you will, I think, get fans. And then the fans will come to the stadium and they will buy jerseys, and they will align with players if you do it all right.
Yes.
But it takes a high-quality professional organization.
That leads me to the next question. As you're discussing, everybody's background from a diverse, from marketing, from NBA, and your background right around, you've been in 24 years, if you include, your time as a Marine officer, your time getting your MBA, and then, you had various positions at Sprint, for almost a decade and a half. You were constantly being promoted to different, key leadership positions in different units across that global organization. And what led your desire to be, as you just described, the move hasn't been, you've been at Sporting Kansas City, fairly recently, but, to go from, global telecom or tech company, as we want to call it, to now Major League Soccer franchise. What were some of those decisions in your head about this opportunity?
Yeah, I had, by the time that, this opportunity at Sporting kind of presented itself, I had been with Sprint for 16 years. Right. And I had, gone through almost the whole company, frankly. I was a finance guy, and I also did an operational role within the network where I had seen all of Sprint, frankly. And as I was looking towards the next set of my career, it really intersected also with those passions I talked about from a soccer perspective, from a finance perspective, but also from a family perspective. And when this opportunity presented itself, I balanced all three of those and was able to, frankly, come up with a role that, as described, is kind of the CFO of the club, and which means you're the sort of head finance guy for the whole organization. Admittingly, it's smaller than the $15 billion that I used to kind of manage from a finance perspective at Sprint. But at the same time, it's everything together, and it's the sports industry. It's with, I believe, one of the number one sports franchise in soccer. I say that with confidence and with conviction. And I get to do a passion, those two passions of finance and soccer, and then at the same time, I can really involve my kids in this. My kids, I coach soccer. Assistant coach soccer. My kids are involved with soccer. They're in the club system. They play soccer. They enjoy going to the game. And so the great thing about summer weekends around my house is that we all just pile into the car and we go to the stadium for a game, and the kids enjoy it as much as I enjoy it. So I can have a job that I basically bring my kids to work every day, and my kids kind of laugh at me and they say, "Dad, you just go to recess every day because you get to play soccer every day." And I said, "Well, not quite that."
They don't see the work.
They don't see the work side of it, but it is a fun organization,
yes.
And it's really something that, from a career standpoint, is just one of those things I decided to make a decision on, and it's been a great decision, frankly.
Yes. Now you bring up your children, and obviously you love playing soccer as a youth yourself. What is what do you see as the vision as far as soccer in the United States? I know it's growing, and a lot of parents with kids, see the injuries from
Sure.
not just football, but there's injuries from a lot of other sports. People don't often think of swimming or even mixed martial arts, which is becoming popular. I mean, some of these are very dangerous, but soccer has its injuries as well. But what type of trends do you see, say down the road, maybe 2030, soccer being nationwide?
It's a great question. Just to kind of give the one sentence answer to some of that, and then maybe expand upon it, is soccer by 2030, I think, is just going to be enormous. And I don't say that just because I'm in the industry or I want it to be that way. There is foundational stuff that is going on with U.S. soccer, with the MLS teams, and then with the trends in youth sports that I think creates a tremendous solid foundation for soccer. And I'll kind of give you insight into one of them, is that Kansas City is one of the cities that's bidding on, that threw its name in the hat as part of the U.S. bid, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico bid for the World Cup in 2026. FIFA is going to make a decision in the summer as far as where that is going, and we're crossing our fingers and hoping that's the case, that it is here in the United States, Canada, and basically North America. And then the belief is from a Kansas City perspective, and I was down in Houston just a couple weeks ago, basically helping pitch, or not pitch necessarily, helping answer questions about Kansas City's bid as part of one of the host cities when U.S. soccer comes in 2026, and it's going to be incredible when it does, and I believe it will. And think about a scenario in Kansas City where you have, we're partnering with the Chiefs at Arrowhead to do this, but think of a scenario where you have perhaps like England versus England versus Germany as one of the teams that are playing down at Arrowhead. I mean, you're going to have 150 to 200,000 people descend on Kansas City that are incredibly passionate soccer fans. They're going to see our city and are going to see what the United States can put on from a kind of a celebration of a sport which is the largest, most participatory, most economically strong sport in the world. In Kansas City, and that'll occur in 20 other venues across North America. And I think that'll just be a huge shot in the arm again to this soccer from a development standpoint, because it is a world sport. We have players in Kansas City here today that not only grew up in Kansas City and were part of the club systems in Kansas City, but we have also players from Spain. We also have players from Africa. I mean, we have players from South America on our team, and that it just shows you how much of a global sport it is. And it's an easy thing to watch. I think you're now seeing several generations of kids and parents that have been involved with soccer. Where me, for example, my mom didn't know anything about soccer in 1988 to 92 when I was in high school, right. But I played soccer, and now I have kids that play soccer. So as a parent, I understand soccer and I can watch soccer, and then my boys play soccer, and think of just 10 years down the road, it's now 3 generations of understanding soccer and playing soccer. And that trend, frankly, will continue, because you're seeing youth participation in soccer really skyrocket, and you're seeing the professionalism of the sport also skyrocket. And you're seeing also investment by teams and investment by Major League Soccer, and as well as investment by U.S. soccer, from a commitment standpoint to generate high-quality soccer players out of the United States.
Yes. One thing that I've thought of is returning after retirement from the Marine Corps and coming to Kansas City. And our team growing up, it was just, no offense, it was always the Royals and the Chiefs. And coming back now, the Sporting Kansas City has done phenomenally well. But I've seen some of the demographics. When I was a young kid, there was George Brett. He was an icon in the community, and Frank White and Freddie Patek and some of these big name. But now I see a lot of the players we are importing. And what's your opinion as far as American players being at the top? We always watch the Olympics and see how many medals America wins, But some of our players in some of these sports, such as Major League Soccer, I mean, we do have local Kansas City natives that play here at Kansas City, but often it's just like I see now with the Royals. We have a lot of, players not from Kansas City, but they're from the Americas.
Yeah.
How do you see that now and in the future?
I'll give you a pretty good perspective here. You look at Barcelona. Barcelona is one of the biggest, obviously, soccer franchises and names in the world. They have had their academy system where they have been developing players through the Barcelona way for 40 years.
Right.
I mean, they have an established academy program that has been there for a long time. Sporting Kansas City has the structure that is exactly the same as Barcelona. I mean, we have individuals or players that are involved at a very young age, as young as 10, that we start getting visibility to, and we start coaching and making them go the Sporting way. But that's only been around for a couple of years, frankly.
Right.
And so, Europe has a head start. Barcelona has a head start. They all have a head start because they're there. Foundationally, this is where he goes back to your question about what it's going to look like in 2030. You're going to see great U.S. players come out of these systems because there's nothing structurally that we can't replicate with Barcelona or with Real Madrid. Perhaps maybe money is one, but just think of just structurally we can have those programs, and you'll continue to see great players like you talked about George Brett in Kansas City. Well, in some of the places that I run around with too in Kansas City, they talk about Matt Beasler as one of the guys who's a local Kansas City guy who played around here that at the same time is on the U.S. national team and has played for a long time on the U.S. national team and is an icon in Kansas City. I think you're going to continue to see that. I'll throw out Christian Puselik right now, who plays for Borussia Dortmund in Germany, who's a young guy, not even 20 yet, who's an absolutely fabulous player out of Pittsburgh, out of Pennsylvania. I think it's Hershey, Pennsylvania. He's out of. He is. You watch him play, and you realize that guy is is playing some of the highest level of soccer in the world as an American, and he's just one of a vanguard, I think, of many that are coming. Again, shows you and represents to me that the United States has just got to continue to develop and continue to grow, and you will eventually see those players of that caliber where European clubs and European teams are standing up and saying, "Whoa, who's this? Who's this kid? Who's this Christian Puselik kid?" And they'll eventually want him on the team. I think that'll happen for a lot of Americans. It's coming.
So you think Major League Soccer is going to be taking more of the market share away from some of the other football, baseball, basketball sports in America?
I'm not an expert on a lot of that stuff. I'm still, frankly, learning some of the industry, but the trends are very positive for soccer in the United States. I mean, there's still the demographic of soccer, who your soccer fans are, is very, very good. It's a very young demographic that basically from the ages of like 12 to, I call it like 40 is really your sweet spot demographic for soccer, and that's outstanding. From a marketing perspective, from a sponsor perspective, but also just from a fan perspective, you have a young base, and you're continually growing that base by having more and more kids participate in soccer. Yes. Sporting Kansas City has a network of soccer teams at the youth level that kind of tier to us across multiple states. I mean, it's over 100,000 kids that are in our network.
Wow.
That's our pool of talent that Peter can choose from a technical perspective, but also turn to be rabid, passionate fans that are directly involved with playing soccer. And the trend at the youth level continues to be high participation in soccer. And perhaps some of those other sports haven't necessarily had that, but we believe soccer can reside effectively, in Kansas City with the Chiefs there, with the Royals there, and with Sporting Kansas City there. And by the way, all three can be successful, and you can all still have full stadiums. We've seen it actually happen. So we're not afraid, and we're not believing we have to compete against the Royals, and the Royals need to, kind of have a bad year for us to have a good year, or vice versa.
Right.
We want the Royals, as a Kansas City, to have a great year. We want Sporting Kansas City obviously to have a great year, and we want the Chiefs to have a great year because we're a great sports town. But we think there's room for three of us here.
Yes, and sort of how Marty and I crossed our paths is not long after Marty became a member here at Sporting Kansas City. Our two organizations with Sporting Kansas City, as well as the charity that I run with Heroes United for the Gold Star families, he had connected with one of the other local organizations, Kansas City Chiefs, that we partner with, and focusing on, from your leadership and your background in the military, wanted to reach out and promote Major League Soccer to the Gold Star families. And you really, that kind of leadership and mindset to give back to the community from, an area you have a close affiliation with the United States Marine Corps. And unfortunately, those who have lost someone who was killed in action, there's a lot of families here that we don't always see. It's not a young service member wearing a jacket oftentimes, or maybe an amputation. I mean, a Gold Star, a widow or a surviving child does not stand out in the community. But your leadership brought together a very unique opportunity that you engaged not only the Gold Star families, but the entire military family community. And can you describe some of the planning and how that worked out as an organization after it was all done and over?
Yeah, sure. So on August 6th this past year, we had our inaugural kind of salute to the military, but one that we sort of kind of put it, kind of increased the focus on it, or kind of brought it up a notch. We call it our sporting salutes match, which is our salute to our military and the service and sacrifices of not only the military members but also their family. And as sporting was looking at the kind of the calendar of events for the year of all the different matches, we thought as an organization it was important to recognize and to salute the sacrifices of those folks that are on the front lines for us that we sometimes forget, back in our in the Midwest here in Kansas City. And so when the opportunity came up to kind of help organize it, I, with my background in the military as a veteran, but also contacts in the military community, I kind of jumped in with both feet to say I'll take a leadership role in organizing this and making this as big as we can possibly make it, and with the expectation of really. Our mission statement was to make this the most engrossing and encompassing salute to our service members. This was not associated with ticket sales or sponsorships or anything. Right. It's like I want this to be an incredible event that showcases and really values what is going on with our military veterans. And so, taking that perspective, everybody got bought in. It's like don't talk about the war. This is about the warriors. They can be separated because regardless if you agree with it or don't agree with it, and that's not really the point of this, but there's people that voluntarily are sitting on our front lines that are being asked to do things that are extraordinary, and a lot of them are making the ultimate sacrifice. Yes. And so I thought that what better way that I can help as a veteran, in this organization that is putting something on to kind of help drive it. And so I started reaching out to, and by the way, Sporting Kansas City bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. We were locked arms across our executive organization to do this. But I sort of used my military context to just start asking questions around what worked at different venues and what didn't work at different venues. And, and that's where perhaps where I got to our Gold Star families, because one of the things that I really wanted in it was a connection, like more of an emotional connection to our fans, to what's going, to the sacrifices. I mean, sometimes if you just say a name, like this person lost their life, he was in Kansas City and he lost their life, it doesn't have that impact as opposed to saying like, hey, you remember, I'm gonna give you a name, and that person standing right in front of you is his wife. Right. That person standing right in front of you is his child. Yes. And to me, that focuses the kind of the understanding of like, when you read something in the newspaper about somebody that was killed in action, there's a family behind that. Yes. And that's the family that's sitting here, and that's what we're doing at this match is really engaging at that level and getting that fan support to say, oh, now I get it. And so when we had the 12 families out there from a Gold Star perspective being honored on the field, everybody sort of got it, because we were at the same time flashing up the names, the photos of those individuals that lost their lives. And it was an extraordinary event. I had a lot of people that walked into my office afterwards and they said, boy, Marty, that was just I get it. It was at a different level than it was before, and the players got into it. I presented actually to the players and to Matt Beasler and to the coaching staff about what we're doing, and they were all excited about it. And as we look towards next year and the years beyond that, I think it's going to be a staple for what we do at Sporting Kansas City, the Sporting Salutes match, and it will always be that a focus on paying tribute to the sacrifices of our military families. And I was frankly just a conduit of unlocking good ideas, because people would come to my office and say, gosh, it'd be great. I saw this flyover, of all these aircraft at this other place. Yes. Do you think we can do that? And they're in the military, and they're not in the military, and they don't really know how to make that happen. Right. I'm like, well, let's go find out. Right. And I put together a cross-functional team that included people outside, not only in Sporting Kansas City, but outside of Sporting Kansas City. A guy named like James Elliott, who helped me out at Sprint. He was a guy that was communicating directly with the Air Force about getting Air Force assets to kind of do flyovers. And then Jillian Carroll, who was previously with the Chiefs, she hooked me up with an individual at the Chiefs that was kind of their representative to the military. And that's how I got to the Gold Star families. And so it was I said, there's no bad ideas here. What do you want to do? Yes. How big do you want to make this thing? Yes. And it got us all the way to the top. And it was frankly just an outstanding event. And there's a lot of stuff online. You can go look. It was a fabulous event.
It was, and I'll show here, as those viewers that are listening on the audio only, you can go to the YouTube channel and see these images that'll be on the YouTube channel. One of those individuals that your role was kind of the commander for this program, and you had a subordinate inside your organization. I saw, he as the focal point, he was given a lot of responsibility for this and basically herding a lot of the cats in these military family. But I saw a young gentleman, Derek Thompson, who did a great job. And I think that what I could see from the outsider looking in, that mentorship, you gave him, it looked like a lot of rope. He had a full plate that day. I mean, this was a very large event with flyovers and the whole 9 yards from different branches of service attending. The families of the fallen, to include, one of the local families has 3 children that they are in competitive soccer. This means their father, he was a Delta Force soldier who was killed in action. And you really made something very, meaningful and positive, not just for those young girls that, playing soccer, but for the community to bring it around in your vision. But made all this happen. But, engaging a young, account executive such as Derek, did that come, were you knowing or unknowingly applying principles you learned in the Marine Corps throughout your career? Or, I saw you give him a lot of responsibility. Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah, I think one thing that got me, as I think about leadership in, call it the civilian world, the first Civ Div, used to call it in the military, leadership transcends the military. And I think the greatest attribute that I ever got, or greatest experience I ever got out of the military, was all the leadership training and leadership focus on how to do leadership at the right time, and kind of how the military does leadership. I mean, the Marine Corps especially espouses that through the basic school. I mean, we're one of the few branches that the first 6 months, if you have a 4-year, think of like dedicating out of a 4-year initial commitment to the military, your first 6 months as a military officer is going to the basic school, where you learn to be an infantryman, but at the same time you are deeply immersed in leadership training. Yes. And those attributes of military leadership, again, transcend the civilian, into other parts of the organization. And that's where I believe it's, you can be a very effective, you can take those leadership qualities that you have, that you develop in the military, and directly apply them to what you do every single day. And for folks that sometimes walk in my door and we talk about these kind of things, I mean, I always sometimes end with a statement. It's like, leadership matters. It really does matter. Yes. And if you're an individual that can inspire people in a finance organization or in a marketing organization or in a sales organization to get outside their comfort zone and get them to a place where they see the results, and they put a plan of action to get there that is outside what they originally thought they could accomplish. I mean, that's leadership. Yes. And that's I didn't necessarily do something different with Derek or Kaylee or or any other people that was directly involved with Meg and Dodd. I mean, these are folks that were behind the scenes in this group effort to make it an incredible event. But all I did, I think, frankly, was just provide just effective leadership, which anybody at any level should aspire to do. And I was just unlocking the passion that Kaylee has on match presentation, because she would come into my office and say something like, I want to do this. I'm like, well, damn it, let's figure out how to do it.
Right.
And then she'd come in and says, wow, we could do that. What about doing this? I'm like, well, let's find out how to do that.
Right.
And it's the same thing with Derek, where I said, Derek, you're going to have about 40 people that are going to be kind of looking at you to kind of run, the Gold Star individuals and their extended families that were there. And everything is, what do you need? How can you do it? Let's plan it all out. We didn't wait till the last second. This was a 6-month planning process that started in February. We ended in August. I mean, it was something that we talked about as an organization, as a planning team, for a solid 6 months. And and the net result was it got to the finish line. But that was a lot of passion, a lot of hard work to get there. It just didn't happen. I mean, there was planning behind it.
Yes. Breaking off into another subject that you have been an author of a book, which you wrote while you were in your final executive position at Sprint.
Sure.
And just like Sporting Kansas City, it goes back to a passion you had developed in your early youth.
Sure.
Can you describe a lot of how, not just your interest in history, which you've mentioned, but what led you to planning, doing the research, and actually going all the way through publishing which again, for those who are listening, you can go to the YouTube page and we'll have how to order this book. But describe your book and how it came from concept through publishing.
Yeah, the concept of the book is that it's, I have a passion for military history, and it goes back a long time, and I read a lot of history, and history to me is just a continuum. I mean, it doesn't really just start or stop at a certain point. So, my interest, at least right now, is really researching and looking at kind of what happened during World War II, especially on the Eastern Front, the fighting between the Russians and the Germans, which was an extraordinary battle. But it just didn't start there. It went all the way back to kind of the foundational stuff and the Russian Revolution, and then the Germans, what they were doing way back when. But the book is about the Battle of Kursk, and kind of how that all started. It was something that I didn't necessarily say, like, darn it, I'm going to write about a book about the Battle of Kursk. It actually started about 10 years before that, when I read an absolutely fabulous book by a guy named Jason Mark, who is the owner and publisher of Leaping Horseman Books out of Australia. And he wrote basically almost a first-person account, and the book's called Death of a Leaping Horseman. It's very hard to find. And if you find it, it's extraordinarily expensive, because it is an incredible book. But Jason, how he wrote it, he really he got information that I didn't think was possible. I mean, he had first-person accounts of the battle in Stalingrad, and from both sides, from the Russian side and the German side, like what was going on in the building next door, in the room next door, or I mean, he got levels of details, not only narratives, but also pictures. Wow. And I read the book, and I was like, this is absolutely fascinating. And I actually emailed him, because he put his email in the book. I emailed him and said, hey, this is a great book. How did you kind of get there? And it started up about a year narrative that we just kind of exchanged emails back and forth, but I complimented again him about his writing style and just the level of detail in the first person accounts, because battles are not fought. I mean, they're fought in history books with big statistics and big numbers of like 100,000 here, 100,000 there. But the reality is that there's an individual on both sides that's doing that, and they're not necessarily fighting for some grander cause. They're fighting for the guy to the left and right of them. Yes. And he got those stories, and it really pulled me in. So after about a year, he suddenly got an email in January, and he said, hey, this is in 2005, and he said, hey, I'm taking a bunch of 2007. He goes, you seem to be very interested in this kind of history, and we've started up a good relationship. I'm taking a group of folks, called 10, 12 of us, to Stalingrad to do a battlefield tour. And I had a 1-year-old at home at the time, and I looked at my wife, and she says, you gotta go. And so we did a battlefield tour of Stalingrad with him as an author and as an expert of Stalingrad. We were walking around. And he says, "This was happening in this building, and this was happening in this building, and
Unbelievable.
at this point in the river, here's the picture of it." And it was an incredible experience. And we now have had a 10-year history of doing these tours, and so we've gone to Volgograd as a group. We've gone to Leningrad or St. Petersburg as a group and toured the Mannerheim line and went to went to St. Petersburg and everything around there. We've gone to Chom, we've gone to Staraya Russia, we've gone to Moscow, we've gone to the Ukraine, and then with the recent stuff that's going on in Russia, because they're really shooting at each other now. Lately, we've been more focused on doing the Western battlefields, but we've done battlefield tours of A Bridge Too Far in Holland, and then we just recently got back from Italy, where we did Monte Cassino and some of the battles there. And all of them, the focus is on, as a group, and there's about 12 to 14 of us that do this, the focus of each one is to kind of do some research before going there. So when you go to a city or you go to Monte Cassino or you go to a hill, you're like, this is what happened on this hill, and you do that research. And that really led to my book, where in 2013 we were going to Kursk, and we're doing the study of the Battle of Kursk, which is the 70th year anniversary of it, or the 80th anniversary of it. And I was tasked with finding some stuff about what was going on. And I noticed when we were doing research phase, each one of these trips is about 2 years, when we were doing the research phase, we ended up, I couldn't find a lot of what was going on the northern side. There was a lot of written about the southern part of the Battle of Kursk, but there wasn't a lot written about the northern side, especially in English. So I asked Jason, I said, "Hey, where do you get all this information?" And he pointed me to research sites in Germany and in the United States at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, where you can get all this information. It's just a lot of data. And I happened to go to College Park, Maryland, and I looked at some of their records, the German records, and there's a whole other story on how the U.S. got the German records. But we have copies of them at the National Archives, and you can look through them, and they're in German. Since I read German, I found a bunch of stuff that I put together that became the foundational stuff for when we did our tour. And then in partnership with Jason, he looked at me and said, "Marty, this stuff is fabulous." Was his words. And I said, "Really? That's an honor coming from you." And he said, "If you want to put it more into a book format," he said, "I'll publish it out of my publishing house in Australia." And so after about 2.5 years of research and writing, I mean, that book finally came out. And the great thing is it's been extraordinarily well received. It's on Amazon. It's around the world. I mean, you can kind of find it. It's really kind of odd looking at it, seeing a book that you wrote, on some German website or some, English website. But it filled a void in the history of the battle because there wasn't a lot written on there. So it was exciting, but it came out of a passion. And as I was up till 2:00 in the morning for a lot of days doing the research, I didn't feel like I was doing a job. I felt like I was just reading a book that hadn't yet been written. And I was the guy that was supposed to write it.
Yes, that's amazing that with everything you have going on, your life as a family man, father, business executive, you took a multi-year program to write a book, not to, accomplish a check in the block as a, published author, but to write about something that was a passion of yours for a lifetime. Yeah. It wasn't a short duration pursuit.
No, and I think you're right. I think that the thing that unlocked was, and I've gotten good feedback. They say, "Marty, you should write another one, or you should continue research." And that's the fun thing about history and about what you're seeing today with the opening up of the Russian archives and the continued advancement and opening up the German archives and doing research, is that there's still a lot to be written about what all has gone on in history. Yes. And it's just a matter of level of detail, and that's fun, and that's a passion of mine. That is, again, I don't look at it as just being a seminal moment, and then I'll move on to something else. I mean, I read military history, and I happen to maybe write a little military history.
It's very important that you talk about it being a passion, because even though you talk about possible interest in doing more, a lot of individuals don't understand. Books don't, unless you're a professional writer and have either a story of your own or can go back and do this in-depth research, like Mark Bowden wrote, several in-depth books like these. it's not always profitable.
I think I would give our readers kind of one advice that I got from Jason, who has written many books.
Yes.
And every one of them is the best thing out there. And if you get a hold of them, I mean, they're absolutely fabulous. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, they really are extraordinary, almost pieces of artwork. They come out every couple of years, but they're extraordinary research. They're well bound. They're hardback. But they're the standard by which military history should be written. But as I'm writing this book, and I'm like, Jason, I mean, how do you put a coherent thought together over 250 to 300 pages? I mean, that's really what a book is. It's got all sort of stick together. And Jason gave me some advice that as I tell folks that are ever endeavor to write a book, or maybe if I can say it from the fact that I have published one, I have written a book, is that the book is not written from the first page to the last page. There's some people that get writer's block, or they think they want to write a book and they want to put it perfect together from like the first page to the last page. And Jason said it doesn't work like that. He says the hardest thing to do when you write a book is just to get the first draft done. Right. He says after the first draft done, it's just editing. So as you go through the book, he said your entire first book could be just bullet points. Yes. He said just get it done. Just get it to the point that it is done. And if you have to work on the first page one day and then work on the second to last page the next day, just do it. And if there's something that's like, I don't know what that is, just stop and go to the next page. Put a question mark on it and just continue to work on it. And then eventually, this is what happened to me, over a year period of time and 7 drafts later, the book was done. The draft was done. And that's when I shipped it to Jason, and he did his thing as the publisher where he professionalized it, and he tweaked it a little like you all should, like he should. But that was the hardest part. And after that, it was just editing. It's like, do I use the word, tomato or tomato here? Or do I hear the or the or something there? That was the easier part. The harder part was just getting the first one done. And that's what my advice would be to folks is like, if you're going to put it out there, is just take it in small little chunks. Shakespeare didn't write his masterpieces just sitting down and going like, okay, what's the first paragraph, second paragraph, third paragraph, fourth paragraph? It was a process, and that's what I found. And part of the research phase, and this is the kind of fun part about writing history, and this is one of the things I did with the book in German, the research in German was that going to the German archives and reading German. I mean, this is back from high school when I took German that has benefited me to this day. I read through 50,000 documents that the Germans had. And now I'm endeavoring to get as many documents from the Russian side to make sure it's all balanced and you get both sides of it. But you have to have a passion to do that, and I think that's part of that.
Well, thank you very much. We also want to let the listeners know, and we'll put the link up to Amazon specifically that'll lead you right to his book on Amazon, so you can purchase it if you go to the Go Commando Show website. And know that also any of the links on the website is how you support the show, bringing great guests so that we can talk to you on these topics of leadership and overcoming adversity. And one of the key takeaways from Marty's discussion is, he had some very long-term goals that he's accomplished over his life. He's been very successful in many things, but it's with a plan, hard work, and consistency all throughout. So there's people trying to get rich every day, trying to find the next Bitcoin or something, but there's also everybody that gets burned, gets in the wrong time, doesn't make success, but his is long, steady approach that he's had towards success. That's how he has ended up here as the chief financial officer at Sporting Kansas City, and just an incredible story as far as how Major League Soccer has been effective and what we can hopefully see of Major League Soccer here in the next decade and a half. So thank you all for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it, and thank you very much, Marty.
Absolutely. Thanks, Freddie.
To all my fellow grunts out there who in your youth felt it was your duty to protect us, I salute you. And thanks to the listeners of the Go Commando Show who labor on the farm, who are sweating on the construction site, putting forth your very best at the office. You are making a difference. Support the Go Commando Show in our pursuit of bringing you the highest quality professionals. infiltrate the website at gocommandoshow.com, where you can view all of the podcasts and arm your team with incredible deals on health supplements, commando clothing, and equipment. Every time that you get a good deal, it supports the show. What deals? When you purchase anything from the website, Amazon, healthcare supplements, you're covering our six. And to the ladies on the team, when you outfit yourself in the super sexy threads from Naked Zebra, and yes, I'm talking about in a fuego, you are firing the sniper shot for our commandos. How else can you support? It's simple. You smash the follow and subscribe buttons on our social media. That is how you support us bringing great guests to talk about serious subjects, not the mainstream media's fake news. So thank you, and until our next show, stay in the attack and go Commando.